My name is Lord Oxburgh. I'm your chairman for this afternoon, and welcome to this seminar on bioenergy. Really, all animals really depend for their life on plants, on things that have grown. And we didn't actually get any land animals until there were plants on land. They come from the sea around about 450 million years ago. 450 million years ago, plants appeared in the sea areas, marine plants. About 350, they came up onto land, and then they were followed by land animals. And so we utterly depend on plants. They're very clever things, plants, because fundamentally they take the energy from the sun, they take raw sunlight, they take water either from the ground or from the atmosphere, and they take CO2 from the atmosphere, and as you know, through photosynthesis, they manufacture really quite complex organic molecules. And these organic molecules go to make food for us and food for other animals. And the trouble is that one terrestrial species, namely the human species, is now mushrooming, blossoming, whatever word you like to use, at a prodigious rate. And clearly there has to be some relationship between the amount and character of plant life and the populations of human beings and other animals that depend on it. And clearly the prospects for us are not terribly good if we really mess up and seriously damage the plant life on which we depend. So that, in a sense, is the background for this afternoon. We are focusing on plants as an energy source, and you will be aware that we have had a recent post note, which I think is available around about for people to pick up, which deals with this. And we have a very distinguished and interesting panel of speakers to guide us through our thoughts this afternoon. And without more ado, I'll begin by asking Joe Howes to speak. Now, Joe is what I might describe as a post-alumnus, or alumna, sorry. She was a research fellow who worked with Post, and she did Post Note 186 on the prospects for a hydrogen economy, and she went on to work as an energy consultant in various areas with E4 Tech Limited, and most recently she is employed by BP. Joe, over to you. And now let me warn you that I am a very brutal chairman. Our speakers have 15 minutes allocated each, and I will sort of start to get twitchy at after about 12 minutes, and after 15 minutes becomes spectacular. Over to you.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you very much to Post for inviting me to speak. I was at Post for the summer 10 years ago, and I appreciate what a challenge it is to bring together views from a whole sector and squeeze it into 4 pages on one subject. So very well done to Post. I'm from BP Biofuels. BP started looking at biofuels seriously about 5 years ago and formed BP Biofuels as a business to drive BP's commercial participation in this area. And BP takes this business seriously because we think biofuels are going to continue to be an important part of the transport energy mix. And by seriously, just to give you a few statistics, BP Biofuels has around 4,000 people working for it at the moment, and we've spent about $2 billion on biofuels R&D. So why is anybody interested in biofuels? Well, there are a convergence of forces that we think are driving biofuels adoption. There's been interest in energy security, for example in the US, in climate change in many European countries, and rural development, which in many countries has helped to reinforce this message. BP's interest came from investigation, as I said 5 years ago, about what energy security and what climate change would mean for the transport sector. and what could really potentially be the outcome of the competing vehicle and fuel technologies that are available to that sector. And at that point, BP identified biofuels, and particularly the advanced biofuels that I'm going to talk about today, coupled with advances in internal combustion engines, as being a really compelling option to achieve those greenhouse gas and energy security benefits. So this graph is from BP's Energy Outlook, which looks out to 2030 and is published every year. And this shows increasing biofuels supply from about 3.5% of global transport fuels today, in terms of their energy content, potentially out to around 7% by 2030. Now, this makes it one of the fastest growing sources of liquid fuels, and in the context of a world where we need around 40% more energy in 2030 than we do today. You can see from the graph that the major growth in that production is likely to be in the US, in Brazil, and in Europe. And actually, the story is fairly similar in the UK in terms of the contribution that bioenergy might be able to make. I've apologised to Caroline already for stealing one of her graphs to put in my presentation, but the UK bioenergy strategy shows sustainable bioenergy contributing around 10% to the UK's total primary energy demand by 2020 and out to 2050. And what's important for me is that actually excluding biomass from the energy mix, deciding not to use any biomass, assuming that risks to do with biomass are too great, actually significantly increases the cost of decarbonising our energy system and of meeting our greenhouse gas targets. And similar messages are shown also by the Committee on Climate Change's Bioenergy Review last year, and by the modelling being done by the Energy Technologies Institute. So bioenergy is important to generate heat, to generate power, and for conversion for transport fuels. And what this graph shows is what DEC's modelling envisages will happen to biomass, to the biomass resource out to 2050, in terms of which sector it might go into, between wood for construction, they didn't just consider energy, heat, electricity, and transport fuels. And you'll see that the orange part of those bars is the route into transport fuels. And that's showing you that biofuels are offering a material contribution over that time period. Now, as the report goes on to say, that can not only be from some conventional biofuels, which can be sustainable and cost-effective, but there are also advanced technologies which, in the medium and long term, enable that significant growth through using a wider range of feedstocks and different technologies to make different types of fuels that can be used in different transport modes in the future. So I've talked a lot in general. I'm now going to move on to what we're actually doing as BP Biofuels. So the theme of today, I was advised by the organisers beforehand, is about sustainability. And actually the principles that we have used to select the biofuels that we're working on are pretty much underpinned by sustainability: economic sustainability, social sustainability, and environmental sustainability. Our first criterion, and I have to apologise a bit about the size of the text here because something's happened a bit in the translation of PowerPoint versions, but it will be downloadable afterwards, so you should be able to see all of the details. Our first criteria is low cost. And for us, low cost means biofuels that are either cost competitive with fossil fuels now, or where there's a clear path to competitiveness in the future. We see regulatory support as only something that would be transitional, a transitional incentive for early deployment. We want to be cost competitive in the future. They need to be low carbon, and this means clear greenhouse gas reductions from well to wheels compared with fossil fuels. They need to be scalable. This is a factor that people don't talk about so often, and by this we mean suitable for mass production and mass distribution. There are a huge range of different types of biomass feedstocks. This pie chart that I've put on the bottom left has even aggregated them into quite large categories. And a lot of those biomass feedstocks could be relatively cheap and could be relatively environmentally sustainable, but there's not very much of them. And so they're not things that BP has chosen to invest in. It doesn't mean they're not a good idea, but they just weren't for us. And lastly, they need to be sustainable. And as I said, that's environmentally, socially, economically. And as a proxy for that, just to start off with here, the graph on the bottom right shows the biofuel yield in terms of the litres of biofuel that you get for every hectare of land per year. The green bars are conventional ethanol routes, the light green bars are conventional biodiesel routes, and the yellow bars are advanced routes. And you can see that some of the advanced routes offer considerably greater biofuel yields than the conventional routes, meaning that we can use land in a sustainable way. And that's what we're driving towards. So where's this led us? Well, we've got a strategy focused around 3 pillars. The first 2 of those, sugarcane ethanol in Brazil and advanced ethanol technology using lignocellulosic grassy crops in the US, those first 2 pillars are about using cost-advantage feedstocks to make fuels in the next few years. The third pillar is about making advantaged molecules. This means improved biofuels for our engines, for example, biobutanol. I'm going to tell you a bit more about these, and I'm going to tell you what we're doing to ensure the sustainability of those different routes. But before I do that, I'm just going to flash up a quick slide, which you definitely won't be able to read, to tell you a bit more about what we mean by sustainability. So these are the type of factors that we consider when we're thinking about the sustainability of our operations. And it starts before we've even started on our operations in terms of what crops we choose, what regions we choose to be active in. We then look at all of these elements, including biodiversity, water, air quality, soil, labour and community rights, in considering how we manage our operations from day to day and year to year. Now, some of these are regulatory, included, for example, in the European Renewable Energy Directive, which sets requirements about the type of land you can and can't use, and some of them are voluntary. So we're working towards meeting voluntary standards, for example, the Bon Sucro standard for the sugarcane industry, which covers a wider range of these impacts. We're also doing them because it's good practice. I mean, if we can measure and monitor these things, we can drive continuous improvement within our own operations. So moving on to what we're actually doing. As I said, the first pillar is sugarcane ethanol in Brazil. And we're actually a significant producer of ethanol in Brazil now. We have 3 mills operating, and each of those, when expanded, will produce up to 480 million litres of ethanol a year. The sugarcane ethanol in Brazil is grown in rain-abundant, rain-fed regions, so we can minimise irrigation. And it's grown in regions that are designated by the Brazilian government through their agroecological zoning laws as being for sugarcane. So they're at least 1,000 kilometres, probably further, but I didn't measure it exactly, from the Amazon region. We have greenhouse gas reductions of over 70% compared with fossil gasoline. And we're not only producing ethanol, we're also producing sugar for food and power. The waste product, the bagasse, which is the stalk of the sugarcane, the bit that's not the sugar, is used to generate power and heat, both for the refinery itself, but also to export power to the grid. We also have a range of social and environmental factors that we make sure to take into account, including setting aside some of the farmland that we use to preserve biodiversity, and meeting social standards. So we were one of the first sugarcane producers globally to meet the Social Accountability International Standard in February. The second area I'm going to talk about is our cellulosic ethanol work in the US, and this is research, development and commercialization of an advanced biofuel. So the idea behind cellulosic ethanol is you grow a high-yielding crop with looking at energy grasses, and instead of just converting part of that to fuel, like you do with sugar to ethanol, converting the whole crop. And the advantage of doing that is it means that you get more fuel per hectare of land, so you need less land overall. They're also perennial crops, as with the sugarcane, so you don't need to plough the land every year, and you can use precision agriculture to minimise fertiliser, water and energy use. We expect to get greenhouse gas savings of over 60% and potentially higher in those projects. We're also using low quality agricultural land, which is not particularly economic for food production at the moment. It's not really being well used. And then the third pillar that I mentioned was the advantage molecules. And the first one of these we're looking at is biobutanol, and we're working on this in the UK right now. So we have a technology demonstration plant in Hull working on the commercialisation of this technology. It's in a joint venture with DuPont called Butamax. And the idea of this is to scale up the technology to commercial scale, where what we'll be able to do in the future is retrofit this technology to ethanol plants, so that any plant that would be making ethanol from first or second generation routes would be able to be retrofitted to produce butanol, a better molecule for use in engines. We also have a collaboration. We also have a collaboration with DSM on a sugar to diesel route. So this is extracting sugars from crops and using an organism to convert those sugars into oils, which then gives you a feedstock for a biodiesel type route. As part of this, we're also doing wheat ethanol here in the UK. So the Vivergo plant, which is a joint venture between BP, AB Sugar and DuPont, will be the largest ethanol producer in the UK. And actually not only the largest ethanol producer, but the UK's largest source supplier of animal feed. So what this plant does is it takes feed wheat, lower grade wheat than we eat, normally be fed to animals, and converts that into ethanol and into a high protein animal feed. So it will produce not only a third of the UK's ethanol requirements, but will also reduce UK farmers' dependence on imported protein feeds. About 80% of protein feed in the UK is imported at the moment, which gives it a greenhouse gas saving overall of over 50% on a well-to-wheels basis, as well as creating 80 direct full-time skilled jobs in the plant and an estimated 1,000 indirect jobs in the region. So that's a quick canter through what we're doing, and I'll just finish up with what we think the future is of sustainable bioenergy. So, I mean, we agree with the analysis that's been done for the UK and globally and brought together in the last couple of years, that biomass can make a major contribution to future global energy supplies. And we think that biofuels done well, including these sustainability practices, are a crucial part of the future transport energy mix. What we need to do now is get on with it, is get on with deploying these sustainable bioenergy projects, meeting the sustainability standards that we've all worked so hard to develop and implement over the last few years, and achieving those greenhouse gas savings. I'm happy to take questions. I don't know if we're doing it now or at the end, and looking forward to the debate. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.